So, of course, everybody has been talking about what this man, Donald Trump, has just done. Everybody is looking at this brand new Bitcoin strategic reserve, but nobody is actually looking at how we could see $1 trillion worth of demand coming for Bitcoin without America printing any money. That's exactly what a $1 trillion budget neutral Bitcoin buy could mean, which is what David Bailey is talking about here on Twitter. So we're going to be discussing not only what a $1 trillion budget neutral buy from America could mean for Bitcoin, but we're going to also be discussing the other countries who are already making a move after Donald Trump made this announcement only 24 hours ago. We've got rumors about China, Middle East, and South Korea all whispering and making a little bit of noise about this strategic Bitcoin reserve. So I think we could be seeing a little bit of FOMO. We're going to be discussing all of this and more with my co-founder from Bitcoin News. Rob, what are your thoughts about one of the biggest 24-hour periods I think I've ever seen in the Bitcoin space?
This is insane, right? It's Bitcoin has been on a 16-year journey going from magic internet money to a $2 trillion asset that is deemed a strategic enough to be held by the United States government. So yes, big news coming out last night. Donald Trump dropping a bomb. And it's pretty much everything that the Bitcoiners could have dreamed for, right? So it establishes two different things. I mean, last weekend, of course, there was this bombshell Truth Social post that Trump put out saying that there's going to be a crypto asset reserve with all these shit coins, right? He's talking about Cardano, XRP, Sol. And then in a follow-up tweet, he said, oh, and I love Bitcoin and Ethereum too. Well, that was sort of a Bitcoiner's worst fear, that Bitcoin would be lumped in with all these altcoins and people wouldn't realize the difference of a true strategic asset, which Bitcoin is. But this new executive order last night was really eye-opening in the fact that it created two separate stockpiles and reserves. One is a strategic Bitcoin reserve with only Bitcoin. This Bitcoin cannot be sold, and it will be first started off with the Bitcoin under the government's possession. And then we have a digital asset stockpile. This digital asset stockpile has all the altcoins in it. And if you read the fine print, it says that it is up to the Secretary of Treasury's discretion whether he wants to sell these. So are we going to see this crypto asset stockpile be sold off in order to buy more Bitcoin? Because as you were saying, it is part of the executive order to find budget neutral ways to accumulate more Bitcoin. So there's a lot of ways that that could be done. And one of them is selling off these altcoins to stack more Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting point you raised there, Rob. It's very true. What is going to go on with these altcoins? I think a lot of Bitcoiners, we were really worried when we did see that Truth Social post last week. Everybody saw this and they saw those dirty token names, XRP, Solana, ADA, and we thought, what is going on? Did we just get rug pulled by Trump? And then this brand new executive order that was signed late last night was a Bitcoin-only executive order. So it's almost as if Trump's done a little bit of a pivot or a double rug pull, so to say. This time he's rug pulled the crypto guys. But I think it's really interesting. This is the question that you asked, Rob. What is going to go on? How is America going to buy Bitcoin in this budget neutral way? Are they going to sell altcoins, or do they already have a plan to accumulate $1 trillion or allocate $1 trillion into buying Bitcoin in a budget neutral way? So this was the tweet I kind of teased in the introduction of today's show. And as you can see, Dylan Leclerc quote tweeted a tweet from David Bailey, the man who's met with Donald Trump on a number of occasions. Dylan says, David Bailey has told you everything Trump will do correctly in regards to Bitcoin in advance with a 100% hit rate. Yet, people are still fading him. So let's see what Dylan was quote tweeting. This is what he was quote tweeting. David Bailey says that America has $39 billion free in the surplus of the exchange stabilization fund that can be allocated to Bitcoin without printing any money. We have $160 billion of selling SDRs, special drawing rights, and we could even raise $800 billion from revaluing gold. So this would hypothetically create $1 trillion of budget neutral Bitcoin demand. What do you think about how America might find money to buy a little bit of Bitcoin, Rob? And do you think there's any other ways that America might get its hands on some cash to raise some capital to buy Bitcoin and put it in this strategic Bitcoin reserve that's just been stood up?
Yeah, so let's run through the three things on that list. So the 39 billion from the Exchange Stabilization Fund. The Exchange Stabilization Fund was established back in the 1930s during the Great Depression, and yeah, I think that was used during the crisis of 2008, 2009, and the stock market crashing and the plunge protection team. They were able to draw on that in order to shore up the stock market and make sure that things didn't get too crazy back then. But yes, I mean, there's $39 billion there that is under the control of Scott Bessent, the Secretary of Treasury, and he could go and, without an act of Congress, again, all these things need to be done since it's an executive order without Congress's approval. Changing things such as the crypto tax laws and whatnot, you need Congress to do that. But these things can all be done from the executive branch, right? So there's a $39 billion there in the ESF, $160 billion in special drawing rights, which are from the IMF, which is a conglomeration of different currencies, and all the fiat currencies are worse than the dollar. So why do we even hold those? Makes little sense. We could trade those in for Bitcoin. And then, of course, the 800 billion from gold certificate revaluation. What is he talking about there? So America currently has 8,000 tons of gold that are currently on the balance sheet marked at $42 an ounce. However, if you look at the current price of gold, gold is trading at around $2,900. So if you were to revalue those gold certificates that represent the gold that we have from $42 an ounce up to $2,900, that would bring you an extra $800 billion on the balance sheet. We could then deposit that at the Fed and then borrow against it. So it's a lot of accounting tricks and whatnot, but there are ways for the executive branch to get their hands on more dollars to buy Bitcoin through this executive order. It's pretty crazy.
Something a lot of people forget, the fact that, as this chart shows, America has the most gold in the entire world, 8,000 tons. They're very, very interesting. And yeah, I mean, you make some really interesting points there. There are lots of ways America can get its hands on dollars to buy Bitcoin in a budget neutral way. And I think this executive order, I think we need to take a moment to just realize how historic this is. I think Dylan Leclerc has a pretty nice summary here, because this is essentially a Bitcoiner's dream only 2 years ago. But we can see, I think a lot of the naysayers, and we're going to show you a video of a naysayer here in a minute, they've been absolutely shocked and surprised at just how successful and how bullish things are looking for Bitcoin in America, myself included as well. We can see here, Dylan Leclerc runs through the narratives that have been proven wrong over the past 12 months. They said Trump will never acknowledge Bitcoin. That failed. Some people said he will never show at the Bitcoin conference in 2025. Again, this happened just, what, a week or 2 weeks after there was an attempt on his life. So a lot of people said, oh, this would be a great excuse for him to pull out. But he didn't. He went to the Bitcoin conference. He made a great speech. A lot of people said he will never talk about a strategic Bitcoin reserve. That's wrong. That's happened. A lot of people said he will never free Ross Ulbricht. He's freed Ross Ulbricht. Then the haters said the strategic Bitcoin reserve won't be Bitcoin, but it'll be a US-based crypto reserve. Well, we got a little bit of a hiccup or a little bit of a scare on that one last week, but it does look as if we have a strictly Bitcoin only strategic Bitcoin reserve. And now it looks as if they will also be buying new Bitcoin for the strategic Bitcoin reserve. So it's almost as if every narrative has failed. And before I turn it back on over to you, Rob, and we have a look at the nation state FOMO that I think we could be seeing, Balaji here also had an interesting tweet. He says this executive order is historic It focuses primarily on Bitcoin, costs the taxpayer nothing, and it saves billions by not selling. And he really liked the clear distinction between Bitcoin and other digital assets. What do you think about the whole narrative game and the narrative potential win that we are seeing, Rob?
Yeah, I mean, with politicians, I usually like to say I don't like to trust them more farther than I can throw them, right? And Trump's a pretty big dude, 6'3", 250 pounds. You know, he's he's as big as an NFL running back. But yeah, no, I think he's really come through. He's made some promises to the Bitcoin community. And I mean, Bitcoiners were, as soon as he was inaugurated on January 20th, and he didn't free Ross the first second he got into office, and he didn't establish a Bitcoin reserve this first week that he was there, Bitcoiners were like, oh, you see, he rug pulled us. He rug pulled us. No, actually, I mean, it's taken what? A month and 2 weeks, and the three main promises that he made, which were, of course, free Ross, strategic Bitcoin reserve, and ending Operation Choke Point 2.0. All three have come through. I mean, that is pretty amazing. And I think it goes to show the power of the Bitcoin community, and just how much weight this asset has now. I think I sent you in the chat here this whitehouse.gov document of the strategic reserve. So that's the first one. If you go to the second link, yeah, and scroll down just a little bit to section 1. Yeah, I mean, they sort of get it, right? I mean, this is a very well-written document. And if we look here, it says Bitcoin is the original cryptocurrency. The Bitcoin protocol permanently caps the total supply of Bitcoin at 21 million coins and has never been hacked. As a result of its scarcity and security, Bitcoin is often referred to as digital gold. Because there is a fixed supply of BTC, there is a strategic advantage to being among the first nations to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve. The United States government currently holds a significant amount of BTC, but has not implemented a policy to maximize BTC's strategic position as a unique store of value in the global financial system. So, I mean, that lays it all out right there. They get it. They understand that this is a once in a not just generation, but possibly millennia opportunity to stake your claim on the future of money. And that paragraph to open up this executive order really shows to me that they understand what they're dealing with.
They understand that Bitcoin is the future. And I really like the distinction there. Bitcoin has 21 million coins, fixed supply. They didn't necessarily say unlike anything else, but it's nice that they mentioned and recognized that, because this is something that is obviously a very clear distinction between Bitcoin and Ripple and Cardano and all of the other things that were mentioned earlier in the week. Now, something else that I personally haven't mentioned yet, but you did in a tweet earlier, Rob, on the Bitcoin News Twitter account. Again, if you guys are not following the Bitcoin News Twitter account, you should be. That's when you're going to get the breaking news as it happens. Rob's an animal there. He's always typing tweets out on his phone, whether he's at a conference or whatever he sees at these Bitcoin conferences. So make sure you are following us on Twitter. But let's have a look at this tweet here. I've got highlighted the second and the third point that you made reference to in this tweet earlier today. And I thought both of these were absolutely fascinating. And maybe you could run through just how important you think this strategic Bitcoin reserve could be.
Yeah, so it legitimizes Bitcoin and it opens up the door to further actions, right? So we already talked about the executive authority. They're able to use the Exchange Stabilization Fund, but then points 2 and 3. So this really gives, I think, a lot of punching power to Senator Cynthia Lummis and her Bitcoin Act. Her Bitcoin Act, of course, would see us acquiring 200,000 Bitcoin a year for 5 years, bringing the Bitcoin total for the US to 1 million Bitcoin. And this would be entirely budget neutral. How? By going through the gold revaluation method, which we just talked about as well, right? So it's not going to use quote unquote additional taxpayer money to pay for this 1 million Bitcoin buy, but would simply revalue the gold that we have to mark to market prices and then transition that from gold to Bitcoin, which I am all for. And I mean, gold, as we know, as we've talked about, is flying around the world right now. It is leaving Switzerland rapidly, returning to the United States. Of course, we know China is stacking a lot of gold. But one thing Michael Saylor has said is, what's a way to sort of rug pull your enemies is to sell your gold on the open market and go on a Bitcoin reserve rather than a gold reserve, right? So is that what is going on here behind the scenes? We don't know, of course, but it's in the world of geopolitics. We have obviously entered a new realm just with this new Trump administration in terms of our dealings with Europe. The old rules-based order that we've known since World War II seems to have just been ended. They've thrown up the table, and now there's going to be new alliances, new pacts, new ways of doing things. And so could rug pulling gold on a geopolitical level be in the cards? Let's see.
Well, who's that going to hurt the most, Rob? I think that's probably going to hurt China the most. I think it's really interesting you bring up the whole geopolitical battle that we can see going on, because literally today, CNBC was running a clip talking about the fact that China is already looking to buy Bitcoin and do a little bit of a Bitcoin backflip. And this is on CNBC. They also mentioned the Middle Eastern Gulf states by name. And again, this was today, literally in the hours after Trump has signed this executive order on creating a Bitcoin strategic reserve. And then also take a look at the date of this article. Carl Menger says, breaking, South Korea considered to adopt a strategic Bitcoin reserve following the lead of the United States. And I couldn't agree more with how Mr. Menger ended this tweet. The dominoes are falling. So even in the less than 24 hours we've had since this strategic Bitcoin reserve was announced, nation states all around the world are slowly starting to, let's say, make a little bit of a move into Bitcoin, or just show a little bit of interest into Bitcoin. We're seeing some rumors pop up of some very large, very influential nation states around the world talk about Bitcoin. Now, the reason why I thought gold was such an interesting point that you raised, and China, is because China is rumored to be sitting on 20,000 metric tons of gold. A lot of people have been doing the maths. They've been saying, hey, look at how much gold China's importing. Look at how much they're mining. And again, for those who don't know, the gold mined in China, it's not allowed to leave China. All of the mining corporations are not allowed to sell that gold to outside entities. So a lot of people have been saying, look, you cannot look at the chart of gold reserves where China officially, publicly says we only hold 2,000 metric tons of gold. When you run the numbers, they're actually sitting on 20,000 metric tons of gold. And a lot of people who are astute macroeconomic and geopolitical commentators, for a very long time, they've kind of said, look, China is aware that the fiat system is going to die eventually. And they've been preparing for this by accumulating gold. China is playing 4D chess. They're thinking in terms of centuries, not 4-year cycles like America. These are a lot of the narratives that we do hear being thrown around about China. They're perceived as this, 4D chess thinker. They're thinking ahead. They're thinking so far ahead of the West, but they don't have a strategic Bitcoin reserve. They could be sitting on a whole lot of gold that could, again, speculation here, but could be worth a lot less if America starts dumping their gold on the open market to buy Bitcoin. So I think the geopolitical chess is a really interesting rabbit hole here, Rob.
100%. And as I was saying, it seems as if the world is sort of splitting in two, and it'd be interesting to see if China and Russia, of course, and the Eurasian component go off into a gold standard, whereas the US and whatever's left of Europe and the G20 powers go on a Bitcoin standard. This would be a crazy development. But yeah, I mean, it seems as if we're seeing the world bifurcate right in front of our very eyes. And if China is secretly stacking all this gold, and if their listed gold holdings are at 2,000 tons and their actual holdings are 20,000, why would you hold that 10x difference in secret? Because you're trying to rug pull, right? You're trying to rug pull the US dollar and the fiat system with one day you come out on a Monday morning and you say, hey, we've got all the gold, twice as much as America has. We are the new monetary order. You're going to follow us. So, I mean, that's how these things seem to work, right? They're done in secret behind the scenes, and then an announcement is made, and the vast majority of people who aren't paying attention to these things are really caught off guard. But if you're here, you're listening, you're interested in the world monetary order and how Bitcoin plays into it, and you're well ahead of the curve. So know that, and keep your eyes open, because wild things could be happening.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point you made there, Rob. Couldn't agree more. Most people are not paying attention. Those who are here today are paying attention. Most people, most of the 4,572 of you guys tuning in between Twitter and YouTube, hopefully are paying attention and hopefully are buying Bitcoin for what could be very cheap and discounted prices that we might not see for very long if America does start buying or plowing $1 trillion into Bitcoin. If you are looking for somewhere to buy Bitcoin, we always remind you guys about our show partner, that is Rhino Bitcoin. We think they're the best place to buy Bitcoin, and you can do everything you need to do on Rhino. You can buy Bitcoin, you can sell Bitcoin, you can use the Lightning Network to send Bitcoin anywhere around the world that you might want to send it. As you guys can see, Rhino Bitcoin has one of the slickest user interfaces in the entire space, and in the not too distant future, you're even going to be doing some really cool things on Rhino Bitcoin. You will be able to borrow against your Bitcoin and do lots of other very unique things with Rhino Bitcoin. This is why we call them the all-in-one Bitcoin super application. And again, they're even giving you guys $10 of free Bitcoin if you sign up using the promo code Bitcoin News. That's one word, capital B for Bitcoin, capital N for news. Plug it in and get your hands on $10 of free Bitcoin. I don't know how much longer that's going to be free for, but as you can see, All Night Hider in the chat has given you guys the link to Rhino Bitcoin and even the exact promo code that you can use to get $10 of free Bitcoin. So highly recommend you check out Rhino Bitcoin. Get ahead of the curve while you still can. Because again, I don't know about you, Rob, but I don't know how much longer Bitcoin's going to be squatting under $100,000 per coin if we have rumors of the Middle East, South Korea, and China all wanting to follow in Trump's footsteps.
Yeah, I mean, the price action has been really befuddling, right? Trump comes out and creates a strategic Bitcoin reserve last night, and Bitcoin dumps. And then it recovers to around $88,000 today, but then it's just been hovering there. There really is, I think it's just a great example that this is just informational asymmetry, right? Some people know what's going on, and the vast majority, I would say 98% of people, have no idea. That the America just said that Bitcoin, this magical internet money, is of strategic importance and is now not only holding what it already has, but is looking for ways to buy more. This really couldn't be more bullish, and I expect within the coming weeks for price to really match up to the reality of the fact that this race is on now globally. As we saw today in that CNBC clip, CNBC was saying that Brian Armstrong, he was at, of course, Davos a couple of weeks ago at the World Economic Forum. He was talking to the finance ministers of all the major countries, and they're interested. They're like, is America going to do this? He was pretty sure they were. So he said yes, and they're ready to follow suit, right? So we've got G20 European countries that way. We've got China, which is already a major mining player in the last decade. They cut that down in 2021, but could picked it back up again as we've seen the hash rate grow there. We know that Russia is mining Bitcoin, and then small nations too, right? Like El Salvador and Bhutan. So this is a race around the world. America really sounded the starting gun last night in an official way, and I'm excited to see how price plays catch up over the coming weeks and months ahead.
You mentioned two interesting points there, Rob. One of those was hash rate and the mining race that's going on around the world, and we are going to come back to that in a minute. But the second thing you mentioned was befuddling. Some people are befuddled. Some people are confused. And I don't think there's any better clip of somebody being very confused about Bitcoin than this clip that's gone a little bit viral over the past 12 to 24 hours. Because as we can see, some people are, let's just say, still slightly confused about Bitcoin, comparing it to Beanie Babies. So let's see if we've got audio on this clip. If not, let us know in the live chat. But I want to play you a very befuddling clip that I saw on MSNBC earlier today. Okay, so we don't have audio, but we do have the captions for you guys. And what Rachel Maddow said was two very interesting things. And one of those things is something I actually agree with. She called crypto a scam. Now, I agree, crypto is a scam, but I think Bitcoin is very different from crypto. But then the second very interesting thing that she said that I don't quite agree with, she was saying that Bitcoin is beanie babies. I just don't really agree with that narrative. I think that she has clearly not done the work, but as we can see, not everybody is a fan of Donald Trump's strategic Bitcoin reserve.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of a unfortunate byproduct of this last campaign season is that Bitcoin is now seen in America, at least, as a right-wing phenomenon, right? We have Trump, of course, campaigning on it and now creating the strategic Bitcoin reserve, and he's creating these crypto projects like his NFTs and his World Liberty Financial that is buying up a bunch of different altcoins for their own strategic reserve. I don't really know what's going on there. And yes, I mean, a lot of these projects, other than Bitcoin, are vaporware, right? They are pointless, meaningless, sell to the greater fool type of projects. Whereas Bitcoin it fulfills the properties of money better than any other alternative, better than gold, better than fiat, and thus makes it the commodity that will become the base money for the world in the years and decades ahead. So yes, it's so unfortunate that Bitcoin gets lumped into these other scams. But at this point, if you look at Bitcoin and think that it is just nothing but digital beanie babies, you have completely missed the point. And we've got four letters for them: HS. HFSP. Those are the four letters.
I love that. Have fun staying poor. Great note to end things there on, Rob. Now, you mentioned mining a second ago. And what I find really interesting is we saw a new video come out this week of the Giga Chad in Southeast Asia. Now, the Giga Chad who I am talking about in Southeast Asia is the Kingdom of Bhutan's Prime Minister. But we can see here, I'm not going to play the whole 3-minute clip for you guys. We want to try to bring in the news in the most time efficient way possible. What the update is in the Kingdom of Bhutan is that their sustainable Bitcoin mining operations are now increasing the salaries of locals, and it's helping the government on lots of different initiatives like improving the state of healthcare in the country. So again, this is another one of these giants who's turning to Bitcoin mining, as we can see, as this article calls it, as a tool for fiscal resilience. It's pretty incredible that Bitcoin is now helping the fiscal budget of a little country in Southeast Asia who was lucky enough to get on the Bitcoin mining bandwagon early, and they're benefiting from it. And eventually the critics like Rachel Maddow will not be able to argue with the fact that countries are benefiting from Bitcoin all around the world.
Yeah, so the Bhutan Mining Initiative was initiated by their sovereign wealth fund. Essentially, there's this company called Druk Holdings, and it functions as Bhutan's sovereign wealth fund. And they were buying up a bunch of miners from BitDeer and whatnot, and people didn't really know what was going on. But it finally came out about a year and a half ago, what they were doing, and they've set up massive mining operations based off of their clean energy, their hydropower. They're up in the Himalayas. The snow melts, large torrents of water come on down the mountains, and they can power their Bitcoin miners off of renewable energy. And so they're doing it. And this news segment was great. It was off of Al Jazeera. The people there seem pretty happy with what's going on. The prime minister he's befuddled as well as to why more governments aren't doing this. He said thousands of individuals have become billionaires off of Bitcoin, and why aren't more governments? So yes, it is greatly benefiting this small country, and it's just a matter of time before more countries catch on.
Yeah, only a matter of time before more nations realize how important Bitcoin mining is. Again, that probably is a good reminder if you are looking to learn a little bit more about not just Bitcoin, but also Bitcoin mining. We love to remind you guys about the biggest Bitcoin mining conference in the entire world. This is happening in, let me check my calendar, about 2 weeks' time in America. So if you guys don't have your tickets to Mining Disrupt 2025, I would ask you guys, what are you doing? Because this conference is going to be absolutely massive. It is happening in Florida. Again, Florida, that's very easy to get to. There's not any excuses. There are direct flights to Florida from anywhere you might be, whether you're in America or even South America like I am. Florida is very easy to get to, and you're gonna want to get there because they have a massive list of very good speakers. Dennis Porter's going to be there. We're going to see some big politicians there. I'm even hearing some rumors that we're going to be seeing some very big names appear at the conference. I'm going to be very careful with what I do say on the stream, but what I will say is that you guys can get 10% off your tickets for Mining Disrupt if you use a promo code Bitcoin News. And again, everything you need for Mining Disrupt or Rhino Bitcoin will be linked down below in the description of today's video. Because I think a lot of people talk about this future of this Bitcoin standard, this hyper Bitcoinized world we're moving towards, but you actually get to experience it today by being at the conferences, meeting Bitcoiners in real person. It's a beautiful experience. I love meeting Bitcoiners, and there is absolutely nothing better than shaking the hands of some Bitcoiners. And again, there's going to be a lot of them here at the conference. I didn't stutter. This is the world's largest Bitcoin mining conference happening in America. So highly recommend you guys check it out. I think, Rob, you're going to a conference this week, I believe, a different conference. Where are you headed?
Yes, headed to Austin for the Bitcoin Takeover. Every year in March, there is a large festival called South by Southwest. Used to be just about indie music, but now it's about culture in general. And unfortunately, this has had a lot of cultural impact in America, but they haven't really been too open to Bitcoin. So Parker Lewis and the team over at the Bitcoin Commons in Austin, they've set up a week-long set of events that will be going on coinciding with South by Southwest. And part of that is also Pleb Lab. They're having their startup day. It's a business accelerator competition where over 20 companies, Bitcoin companies, entered into this competition, and they're whittled down to the final 5. And the winner will be announced next Thursday at Pleb Lab. So yeah, very excited to be attending and be a part of all that.
Yeah, it's going to be massive. I'm jealous I'm not going to be at that one. I'd love to head down to that conference. It sounds very, very interesting. Now, we were talking about Bitcoin mining a moment ago, Rob. There was one country we didn't mention, El Salvador. And I think what's going on in El Salvador right now is really, really interesting, because not only is El Salvador coming under a little bit of a fire, but 2 massive entities, 2 massive holders of Bitcoin are coming under attack from the IMF. The first obviously being El Salvador. Everybody is talking about the fact that the IMF has been attacking El Salvador, but then there's a little bit of a twist to this story, because we've seen rumors that Tether, who of course is one of the largest holders of US treasuries in the entire world, might also have to sell some Bitcoin to comply with US stablecoin rules. This is what JP Morgan, one of the biggest banks in the world, is saying right now. So I wanted to quickly discuss what is going on at the IMF. How much influence do they have? Why is Jamie Dimon, JP Morgan, one of the biggest banks in America, saying that Tether might have to sell Bitcoin to become a regulated stablecoin for America? There's a lot to this story, and this is a little bit of a long rabbit hole. So make sure you stay to the end of this one. But Rob, let's start with the El Salvador news. I would love your take on everything happening in, do we say what used to be Bitcoin country, or is it still Bitcoin country today?
Yeah, great question. So yes, I think we should zoom out a little bit and just go through the last 4 years or so of Bitcoin development in El Salvador. Bukele took over in 2019, and his first 2 years were used to clean up the country, right? It was the murder capital of the Western Hemisphere, and he was able to arrest all the gangs and make it into the first or second most safe country in the Americas. An unbelievable achievement. Few would ever be able to accomplish such a thing. And then riding off of that success of coming down on the gangs, he established Bitcoin as legal tender in September of 2021. And this was a ground shaking development. It was thought that, yes, El Salvador derives about a quarter of its GDP from remittances. So having Bitcoin as legal tender would make it very easy for people from abroad, especially America, to send money back to the country in the form of Bitcoin. And it would set this country off on a new monetary standard, as they themselves do not have their own printing press. They do not have their own fiat currency. They are a completely dollarized country, and they introduced Bitcoin to coincide with the dollar in their economy. So the rollout of the Bitcoin in El Salvador was, some would say, questionable, right? They had set up the Chivo wallet, these ATMs around the country, and they airdropped everybody $30 worth of Bitcoin. But when you're dealing with a free money, of course, there's going to be lots of scams and identity theft in order to try to get this free $30. And it was sort of rife with problems. And so while the top-down approach of giving everybody Bitcoin didn't really work out too well, the introduction of the Bitcoin law in El Salvador allowed for things such as Bitcoin education to flourish. There's this grassroots operation, Me Premier Bitcoin, My First Bitcoin. They have set up the world standard when it comes to Bitcoin education curriculum. They are flourishing in El Salvador. The government is sponsoring Bitcoin education in this form of Cubo Plus, where they take the most talented developers and give them world-class Bitcoin education, introducing them to the top Bitcoin developers, flying them around the world to Switzerland, Lugano, to different conferences and whatnot, and creating this technological base, this new generation of talent that will lead Bitcoin forward in the country. So while the government initiative was sort of running into some snags, from down below, things were really awesome. And of course, there's circular economies, Bitcoin Beach, Berlin, El Salvador, these places where people are using Bitcoin on a daily basis for everyday usage. It's really amazing stuff, and I highly recommend you go and experience it yourself. However, there is a problem here. And so when the Bitcoin law was first announced, the IMF made it very clear that they did not like this. This was a problem, and they pretty much made El Salvador a financial pariah. And over the last 4 years, El Salvador has tried to be a good boy in the monetary system by paying down their debt and trying to make sure that they are up to snuff when it comes to all these regulations and everything. However, the debt situation is getting out of hand. When Bukele took over in 2019, they had $21 billion worth of debt. And as it stands today, they have over $32 billion worth of debt. That is a 52% increase, nearly matching the rate of debt increase that America had over that same period, right? So America's debt is going parabolic. El Salvador's debt is going essentially parabolic. However, the real problem for El Salvador is that they don't have a printing press. Again, they are tied to the dollar. So they can't print money to try to alleviate that debt burden. So that left them in a really hard situation, because their GDP is not growing that fast. For the last 5 years, they've averaged a GDP of 2.8% growth, which is actually lagging a lot of their neighbors in Central America. And for a small country, a developing country, that's just not fast enough. In order to bring prosperity to the people, for a small country like that, you need to be growing at 5, 6, 7% a year in terms of GDP to really lift up all the boats. So where does that bring us? That brings us to the end of 2024, where El Salvador actually had to bend the knee to the IMF and ask for a loan. The IMF agreed to give them a $1.4 billion loan, along with $2.5 billion or so of additional funding from their other partners. But this loan came with strings attached. And those strings included a lot of cutbacks on their Bitcoin program. They could no longer recognize Bitcoin as legal tender. They could not accept Bitcoin for taxes. They had to stop all state-sanctioned mining, as well as stopping accumulating Bitcoin. So this is where the further controversy arises, right? Bukele has come out and said that he is going to be defiant, that they will not stop purchasing Bitcoin. And they have, over the last week, shown that they are adding 1 Bitcoin a day to their Bitcoin reserves. But what we see here is sort of a contradiction straight up to what the IMF has said is the rules of this loan. So yeah, who's right here, right? Is El Salvador definitely took this deal. They signed on board for this, but are they defying the IMF to their face? It's interesting, and also on the chart here with the Bitcoin purchases, you could see that they took a break for a week of buying Bitcoin, but then purchased a week's worth in one day. So lots of questions. There's more questions than answers at this point. And Bukele has been defiant, yes, but he has not been clear. So I don't think we really know exactly what's going on here, but there is definitely tension between Bukele, El Salvador, Bitcoiners, the IMF, and the future of Bitcoin country.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely one of these watch this space stories. It's still very unclear what's going on right now. That was a great breakdown of everything, Rob. That was incredible. You pretty much nailed everything that's been happening in El Salvador over the past few years. But I think, again, this chart here continues to confuse many of us. I was asking many questions when we saw this big flat line here for about a week. We saw no buying from El Salvador, and some people were saying, hey, what's going on? Has the IMF won this battle? But no, they're still buying Bitcoin. Again, it's really important to recognize just how well this Bitcoin strategy has worked in El Salvador. Right now, the treasury for their country is sitting on $130 million of profit. It's up by 86%. Right now, they're still squatting on more than $500 million worth of Bitcoins. That's why I think a lot of people are paying very close attention to what is going on with the IMF, particularly because of this tweet right here. I think this opens up a very interesting rabbit hole. Nico from Simply Bitcoin says 94 countries have loans with the IMF. All those countries were just sent a message that they can't buy Bitcoin. This is why after 2021, no other countries followed El Salvador. Okay, it's the IMF's attacks that could be a reason or an explanation for why we only have one official Bitcoin country today. Again, we do have lots of nations that are accumulating Bitcoin in their sovereign wealth funds. Sovereign wealth funds are even printing fiat to buy shares of MicroStrategy in the case of Norway. But maybe countries are a little bit too scared to make Bitcoin legal tender, make it a currency that can be used in a country because they're scared to go to battle with the IMF.
Completely. The IMF, I mean, Alex Gladstein put out a book about the IMF and how they are pretty much a form of financial colonialism, right?
Mm-hmm.
They go to countries when they're desperate and say, yeah, we'll give you cash that we print out of thin air in exchange for large portions of your economy, right? Or we'll direct your economy to create a very specific export that your people don't really want or use, but the rest of the developed world wants. And so that leaves you dependent on making just shrimp, right? I think they did that to Burma. They made Burma's economy highly reliant on shrimp exports, while the rest of the world ate their shrimp. These people were given pennies in exchange, right? So the IMF really has been quite the parasite, and it's sort of allowed for this developed versus developing world situation to develop even further, and the bifurcation of the two and a greater divide, as we've seen today. But going back to the El Salvador point, there was just a press conference yesterday, and yeah, they were asked about El Salvador and what is going on. The person asked, they keep buying. Isn't this in disagreement with the contract that you guys signed. And the IMF said, regarding the recent increase in Bitcoin holding by the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve Fund, the authorities have confirmed that these are consistent with the agreed program conditionality. And we do remain engaged with the authorities on this important issue. So it seems as if the IMF does know that this number is going up on their SBR. There are some questions like maybe the Bitcoin is coming from another fund and they're just switching from one wallet to another to make it look like they're buying 1 Bitcoin a day. I mean, that could be possible. I also got a scoop from a independent reporter down in El Salvador that the FIDE Bitcoin trust, which was established to fund the Chiva wallet program and provide there being no transaction fees in that first initial airdrop of Bitcoin, that was funded with hundreds of millions of dollars, and now that's bankrupt. So maybe that has got some Bitcoin that's transferring over. So there's a lot of questions here. I mean, I like El Salvador. I've been to El Salvador. I think what Bukele has done there has been absolutely amazing. But he's definitely a showman. He's definitely a PR guy, and he's definitely gained a lot of international recognition for his Bitcoin stance. So it would be a real big gut punch if he had to step that down from his own personal standing. But I mean, I think what everybody wants really is what's best for the El Salvadorian people, right? And if the country was really in such a drastic position that they might have defaulted if they didn't get this loan, then I mean, I guess it's understandable. They had to do what they had to do. But what's really going on there is, well, I think the good things moving forward are that 6,100 plus Bitcoin that they own in their strategic Bitcoin reserve will not have to be sold. I think that's clear as part of the deal with the IMF that they do not have to sell that. And two is that these educational initiatives and these circular economies, they're not stopping either, right? And I think that is really going to create the next generation of leaders and Bitcoiners in El Salvador that will continue the Bitcoin mission forward, even if the current administration needs to take a step back.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. We are seeing a lot of grassroots initiatives in Bitcoin in El Salvador. That's what it's all about at the end of the day. You know, Bitcoin is all about empowering the little guy and freeing people from the loan shark, who is the IMF, as Johnny Lee Young very correctly highlights in the live chat. That's who the IMF is. They're a loan shark. Why are they attacking a country where 70% of the population is unbanked? Okay, Bitcoin is banking literally the poorest people around the world. And the IMF is a loan shark swooping in here, literally attacking these people. Okay, this is why we always say Bitcoin is for the little guy. This is why we love Bitcoin. This is why we encourage people to use the tools and investigate how you can get your hands on Bitcoin. There are lots of ways that the little guy can actually get their hands on Bitcoin. Some of the more interesting ways that I've found on my travels by living as a nomad for the past 3 years is actually these really cool little Azteco Bitcoin vouchers. Again, I have issues. I don't have bank accounts. Okay, I have a little bit of issues trying to buy Bitcoin through your traditional exchanges. Okay, and this is why I really like what Azteco has built. They are these really cool little Bitcoin vouchers that you can buy in as many as 190 countries all around the world. And you can literally get started by buying these vouchers with as little as $10. Okay, so what are these vouchers? They're a little bit like a prepaid gift card, except it's for Bitcoin. So you can buy these vouchers anywhere around the world. You can get started with $10. And I think it's really interesting that a lot of people from all around the world are slowly but surely beginning to realize that there are alternative ways to get your hands on Bitcoin. We think Azteco is one of these alternative ways that you can get your hands on Bitcoin. You don't need an account. You don't need to verify your location or do any of these crazy things that you do have to do in other places. So highly recommend you check out Azteco. There is a link for their services down below in the description as well, where you can get started buying Bitcoin in 190 different countries with Azteco and start actually using Bitcoin the way it's supposed to be used. Bitcoin is for everyone. Bitcoin isn't and shouldn't be turned into this kind of walled garden ETF asset that I think a lot of TradFi actors think Bitcoin is. Obviously, I'm referring to the ETFs there, Rob. But again, Bitcoin is freedom. Take advantage of it. And as we can see, All Night Hider in the chat has even slapped a link to Azteco in the live chat for you guys. So check that out. There it is, Azteco. Highly recommend you guys have a look at it.
Yeah, really cool product there, Azteco. Again, don't need to sign up. Can just go straight online, purchase $10, $100 worth of Bitcoin, and purchase the gift card and send that Bitcoin anywhere to any wallet around the world. So very cool product.
Very cool product. Very cool product. Now I want to take a look at the live chat because it is absolutely blowing up right now. Okay, there is, if my numbers are correct, there's 6,318 of you guys on the live stream. So welcome to everyone tuning in on a Friday afternoon. Again, the weekend is coming and you guys are not out drinking and partying. You listen to the Bitcoin news. So thanks for tuning in. We have a lot of you guys in the chat. I'm being very careful about what I read on a live stream and which comments I don't bring up. I don't want to get ourselves in hot water here, Rob.
No,
I like this comment from Rock VTM. When a crypto clown enters the palace, he doesn't become a crypto king. The palace becomes a circus. I think this is a great reference in regards to the differentiation we need to be making between Bitcoin and crypto and these two different stockpiles that we now have in America.
Speaking on that, I mean, it really is interesting to think how much does Trump really get Bitcoin? And just some of the comments that he's made whenever he's in front of a mic and Bitcoin is the topic of conversation. I mean, of course, at the Bitcoin conference, he said, keep having fun playing with your Bitcoin, right? And then last night when he's about to sign this executive order to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve, he goes like, I made this promise, right? Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right. I made this promise. Yeah. And as he signs it. And then today at the White House summit, he's reading the script and he goes, one thing all Bitcoiners know is to never sell your Bitcoin. Well, I don't know. Well, I guess that's been true so far. They say that. You guys say that, right? Well, we'll see if it's true. And so he's obviously being fed these scripts that are very pro Bitcoin. And then he throws in these remarks that make it seem as if, but he's surrounded by people, obviously, who get it, right? To his right at this summit today was David Sachs of Craft Ventures, longtime Silicon Valley guy, longtime Bitcoin proponent. I mean, he's also dealt with Solana and some altcoins as well, but he understands the importance of Bitcoin. Then we've got to his left, there's Scott Bessent, who's the Secretary of Treasury, and it seems as if just the man that the time has called to be the leader of this new monetary reordering, understanding that we need to bring the dollar down in terms of making ourselves more competitive for manufacturing, that the stock market isn't the most important metric, that bringing the 10-year rate down on the 10-year bonds is most important. And then sitting next to him is Howard Lutnick, the former CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, who has $1 billion worth of MSTR. I think Lutnick himself has said that he has hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin himself. And Cantor Fitzgerald, of course, is the person who custodies the treasuries for Tether, their $100 billion plus of treasuries. So he's surrounded by people that understand the significance of Bitcoin, and I think that's been enough so far to really get everything that we've been promised.
Yeah, it's really interesting what's happening in America right now. It's a great point you make about who is actually surrounding Trump, because again, who knows how much Trump really knows about Bitcoin? Who knows whether he's reading off a script? I don't know, but it is good that maybe we do have Howard Lutnick in one ear of Trump saying, look, we need to be paying serious attention here. Bitcoin is a potential solution to many of the problems that we are seeing around the world. I think obviously Trump has said a couple of promising things when he said that we're going to try to pay off the national debt by giving everybody a little bit of Bitcoin. I thought that was okay. That was mildly promising. When he said that, I was like, oh, okay, that actually sounds as if he's come up with that one on his own, or he's actually given that one some thought, because that's pretty original. I've never heard anyone say anything along those lines. We're going to give everybody a little bit of Bitcoin to pay off the national debt. I thought that was cool.
Yeah, I think that was the line that sort of sold him back last summer when he started talking to Bitcoiners and campaigning on a pro Bitcoin stance. I think that was the first thing that really got to him, is that no, Bitcoin will not compete directly with the dollar, at least initially, but it could provide a way for Bitcoin to help deal with the national debt. So I think that's what he understands.
Speaking of the national debt, I think we're seeing some really interesting things emerge recently, because now it's not just, you know, our good friend Donald Trump talking about how dire the situation is with the debt, because Bitcoiners have obviously been talking about how bad and how dire the debt situation is. But when one of the world's most influential macroeconomic, let's say, brains. Would you call Ray Dalio a macroeconomic brain, Rob? How would you advise him? I've learned more about the debt from him than anyone else. What would you? Is he an analyst? Is he? What do we call Dalio here?
You could call him a monetary philosopher. Yeah,
Ooh.
no, he really is able to sum up the situation from a 30,000-foot view, looking at the rise and fall of empires and the rise and fall of world reserve currencies over the centuries and how it plays out today.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great monetary philosopher. Those were the words I was searching for there, Rob. I think that's a great way to frame him. But I think it's really interesting. Ray Dalio, one of the most famous investors of all time, just made a very, very ominous prediction about America's debt crisis that he thinks is actually a lot closer than most people think. We are talking about a handful of years here. And as we can see, Dalio has issued a dire warning of America's debt death spiral. And he's also told people how they can protect themselves. So obviously, Dalio recently made a little bit of a pivot into Bitcoin, and he has kind of changed his tune on Bitcoin here. So today I want to explore this question of, is Bitcoin a solution to America's debt death crisis? And has Donald Trump been handed a little bit of a debt ticking time bomb? Because a lot of people have kind of been pointing to the fact that Trump might really have his work cut out for him as we kind of transition into this Trump-led era for the next 4 years that we're going to expect to be getting. So this was the article that I saw this week that was really interesting. Again, a lot of people kind of didn't pay much attention to this interview that Dalio recently did, because everybody's talking about Trump and all of the crazy things that he's been talking about since he got into office. But we need to be paying very close attention to what Dalio is saying, because he makes a good point. We are in a crisis right now when it comes to the national debt, don't you think, Rob?
Yeah, I mean, it took us from 1776 to the 1980s to amass our first $1 trillion worth of debt. By the time that Trump took over, I mean, we were looking at God, well, I think it was 12. He took it from 12 to 20, and then Biden from 20 to 36. Yeah, I mean, it's just going up exponential right now, right? And we are in the middle of course, Triffin's dilemma. We have the world reserve currency, which has, yeah, there you go. And that's 31 trillion. Today we're at 36, right? So it's gone even steeper than that. But as you can see from that chart, it really doesn't matter who the president is in terms of which party they are from. This country is addicted to debt. And when your number one export is printed up pieces of paper, it's pretty easy to understand why that's the case. The fact that the rest of the world will accept our paper for their goods, their hard goods, their oil, their manufactured products. It puts you in the situation where it's the easiest thing to do is just to print them up and send them out and get in debt, and it's works great while it works, but then one day it doesn't, and it seems as if that day is getting closer and closer, and that's what Ray Dalio is talking about.
Yeah, I think the more recent statistics I saw was the fact that America is printing $1 trillion every 100 days, which is just crazy to think about. You brought up a statistic here about how long it took us to accumulate the first $1 trillion of debt. It was literally hundreds of years. And now we're printing $1 trillion of debt in 100 days versus 100 years. Think about a lot of people really struggle to conceptualize this idea of exponentials and how rapidly things are changing. But right now we are in an era where the debt is going exponential. And when people like Ray Dalio are warning us about the debt crisis that we're living in, we really do need to be paying very close attention, because again, he's one of the most successful investors for good reason. People listen to what Dalio says, and I think it's just wild that nobody seems to have a solution for the national debt.
I mean, it's just like end of empire stuff. It's classic, right? We spent $8 trillion on the Middle East, on Iraq and Afghanistan. And what did we get out of that? The Taliban took Afghanistan back over. We left $80 billion worth of military equipment when we fled. And now, I mean, Iraq is a mess, and they give most of their oil to China. So while we were going out and spending $8 trillion on war, China was able to take trillions of dollars and spend it on infrastructure and building up their industrial base. So yeah, but I mean, this is a story as old as time, right? I mean, it really echoes the Roman Empire in so many ways. And they did the same thing. They devalued their money, they clipped their coins, and eventually their money ran out of purchasing power that they needed to fund the armies to maintain the empire. So I think what we're seeing right now with this Trump administration is trying to sidestep that, or at least take proactive measures in order to, if you know that this ship is going down, at least you can do it on your own terms. And I think that's what we're seeing in terms of the Ukraine negotiations and Europe, us separating ourselves from Europe, us repatriating all this gold from Switzerland, us creating a strategic Bitcoin reserve. There's really some monumental changes afoot right now, just within the first 6 weeks of this new presidency. And I think Bitcoiners are positioned best to for what comes next. You hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, nice. Yeah. So what do you think? Is this the end of the American empire?
Yeah, I think it is close to the end of the American empire. I apologize about that, Rob. My internet completely decided to cut itself out, and you sounded like a robot. I could hear you. You sounded like you were under the ocean or rapping for me there for a minute. But I was trying to bring up this chart here in the background, and I wanted to bring it up because you mentioned the fact that we're at the end of an empire. And this is something that Dalio has really kind of popularized. Okay, he's talked a lot about how these global reserve currency holders over the past 500 years have seen transitions. And he has kind of become very famous for saying, look, the American empire is declining and the Chinese empire is rising. And he expects that the Chinese empire is going to try to challenge the great American empire. And his books are incredible. I've read Big Debt Crises. I hope that's how you say it. And his more recent, newer book, the name is escaping my decaffeinated, dehydrated brain right now. I think it's The Rise and the Fall of Empires. That's what it's called. And in that book, he studied the 10 biggest empires over the past 500 years. And he showed how they go through these, 250-year cycles. So an empire will rise for 200 years and then it will go through a 50-year decline. And I think it's a really great point you raised there, and you brought it up. America is seeing this debt crisis, this debt issue, and everybody is kind of looking around saying, what's the solution? What comes next? Well, if history is any guide, history will say that America is going to find a challenger soon. Is it China? I personally don't think so. I personally actually think China's very weak and they're artificially strong because of what globalization has given them. I think in a deglobalized world, America is actually still the strongest nation in the world. This is something a lot of people forget about China. It's energy poor. It's food poor. It is very reliant on imports from other countries, and it is suffering from a water crisis. It simply doesn't have water in the country. So I think these are lots of things people forget and miss about China. And, I think we're trying to give you guys both sides of the story, because Dalio is obviously a massive China bull. Yeah. And again, another great point that All Night Hider here in the chat mentions is the fact that the US has great demographics. China does not. And I think all of these things really do need to be considered when we're talking about how America and China could interact with each other as we could be. Again, who knows? Pimp barbecue sauce. I love the name, by the way. But some people are saying we are at the end of this American empire and the debt is this insurmountable issue. But who knows what's going to come next? How can Bitcoin save the dollar?
Yeah, so I think the comments here bring up a lot of good points. Demographics is destiny, right? And China's one-child policy, they shot themselves in the foot. By the end of this century, their population, which is at 1.2 billion or so right now, is going to be cut in half, right? They're going to lose 600 million people in that country. And it's set up like an inverse pyramid, right? Where there's one child who has to support two parents, who has to support four grandparents. And it's very hard for that society to function in the decades ahead. That means, I think China knows this, and they've been doubling down, tripling down on robotics. I think they see that as the way of maintaining themselves as the world factory, by using robots to do the hard work on the factory lines. But when I say the end of the American empire, I do not mean the end of America. And I do think that the Trump administration right now knows that if they can get ahead of this, they can set America up for the future. America has been the world police. We've provided safe travel on the seas across the world for every single nation to conduct trade. And that's benefited a lot of other countries. Some would say more than it's benefited America itself. So if America is able to sort of go back to like a Monroe Doctrine, where we focus on the Western Hemisphere. That's why I think Trump is always talking about making Canada the 51st state and taking over Greenland. He wants those resources so that America can sort of be self-sufficient in our side of the world, right? If we've got the additional oil from Canada and we've got the rare earth minerals from Greenland, we've got all the agricultural base that we could ever need here in America itself. And so if we can bring back manufacturing through tariffs, incentivize companies to build factories here in America, we have the natural resources that we need to continue on for hundreds of more years. And so I don't think when we say the end of the American empire, it actually could be better off, not only for the American citizens, but the world in general.
Oh, it's such a beautiful note to end things on there, Rob. I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with America over the next 10 years. Are they going to use Bitcoin as this strategic asset to help fix all of the problems that a lot of us see with the US dollar and with America? I think it's certainly a possibility. If you are one of the 7,000 of you guys joining us live between Twitter and YouTube, thank you so much for tuning in on a Friday afternoon. If you joined us late, you can rewind to the beginning of the stream and check out everything Rob and I covered in what was one of the more craziest weeks in Bitcoin. I do think the past 24 hours was probably the most eventful 24 hours I've ever seen in the Bitcoin space. I've been here for 9 years, I believe now. It's 8 years. It's time flies when you're having fun, Rob. And it's pretty crazy how quickly things are happening right now. So I'd encourage everybody, strap in. The next 6 to 12 months could be really interesting. As All Night Hider has said, smoke that like button. Cheech and Chong, we would appreciate a smoking of the like button if you did enjoy this 1 hour and 10-minute live stream from Rob and myself. Rob, have you got any final words of wisdom you want to leave the listeners with tonight?
Yeah, know what you own. If you hold private keys, you've got the ability to alter the Bitcoin ledger, right? And this is now deemed a strategically important asset by the United States government, the largest economy in the world. So you were able to front run the US government, pat yourself on the back for that, but don't stop there. Keep stacking, stay humble, enjoy the weekend, and it's good to be a Bitcoiner.
Couldn't be a better time ever to be a Bitcoiner. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in. We'll